Once again, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Leonardsburn Farm for this exclusive Dodson & Horrell Masterclass. And we're incredibly lucky to have Dodson & Horrell brand ambassadors Laura Collett and Harry Meade with us this evening to host two very special demonstrations, followed by an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the evening. All profits from this evening will be donated to World Horse Welfare. So, a little about our two hosts. Firstly, we're joined by Laura Collett, who has won a ream of medals in her pony, junior and young rider career. After receiving her first senior squad selection in 2011 with the wonderful Rein for the European Championships in Le Moulin, she was selected for the European Eventing Championships at Blair Castle in 2015 with Grand Manoeuvre. Earlier this year, Laura won the event by a master's leg at the Dodson & Horrell Chatsworth International Horse Trials on the very talented London 52, the horse that she rode at the European Championships back in Le Moulin in Germany just a couple of weeks ago. Joined today by Harry Meade, who is one of Britain's leading event riders. He represented Great Britain as part of the silver medal winning team at the World Equestrian Games in Normandy in Caen back in 2014, and finished third at Badminton in the same year. Longlisted for the 2018 World Equestrian Games in Trial in the United States of America last year, and was also longlisted for the 2019 European Championships. He's completed badminton 10 times and is the youngest rider to have received a much sought after Armada Dish, awarded for 5 badminton completions. I'm sure you'll all agree we're very lucky to have Laura and Harry here this evening, and please do ask questions, and if you haven't already, please take an opportunity to speak to them in the interval or at the end of the masterclass. Don't forget, you can pick up your goodie bags as well, if you haven't done so already. So we've introduced the riders, and I feel it's now time for your riders to introduce their horses. So over to you, Harry and Laura.
Hello, can you hear us? Very good. So this is a great opportunity to do a demo with Laura, and it's a little bit like the Fredericks used to and the Prices do now. It's a little reminder of what could have been if Laura and I had ended up getting married and done a series of these every year. But I'm riding a horse called Merrywell Tradition. He's a 7-year-old. He's known at home as Merry Legs, which is slightly embarrassing when I was competing at Houghton and I was calling to Georgia, who's standing over there, if she could bring Merry Legs over, and realised there were about 30 people in between us, and I did just say, at least now the whole collecting ring knows I've got a horse called Merry Legs. He's 17-1. He's a 7-year-old. I got him from Ireland at the back end of last year, and he was a sort of horse that, when I looked at, the first thing I said is he's too big, and I really didn't want to buy him. And I thought of every good reason not to buy him. But he moves well, he jumps well, he gallops, he's got a good brain, he's tall, but he's got plenty of bone, and what he's got below the knee matches what's on top. So in many ways, and added to that, he's very nimble as well. So in many ways, although I was determined not to buy him, I couldn't find a good reason to leave him behind. And he's done a load of novices and one intermediate since I've had him this year. He won the 2-star at Bergam in July and is competing at Gackham the day after tomorrow. Laura.
So my horse is called Calmaro. He is an 8-year-old. I bought him as a 4-year-old from Germany. I went to see a lot of horses in Germany, and he wasn't meant to be shown. The husband of the lady who I went to try horses with bought him out by mistake because he looked so terrible. The lady was quite embarrassed. I said, it's all right, I can look through look through that, and it means they're cheaper if they don't look very good. So bought him home and did a bit with him that winter, and actually decided I quite liked him, so sold him to two very good owners of mine, Margie Gibb and Karen Bartlett. They've been huge supporters of mine for a good few years, so it was nice to find them a horse that I really liked, because we'd sold their good horse Contro to be a show jumper. So they got involved with him, and he did some pre-novices and novices as a 5-year-old. As a 6-year-old, he was very consistent, just did novices, and then stepped up to intermediate as a 7-year-old. He won Tattersalls 6 and 7-year-old, the old CCI 1-star, and then went to Le Lion, where he was going really well. He just had an unfortunate 20, which I think was his first cross-country fault, so it was quite frustrating, because I think he would have been second if he hadn't done that. But that's horses for you. This year he was meant to step up and go to Tats to do the CCI 3-star, but unfortunately got a crack in his heel, so that paid to that, and actually he hasn't competed. He's back in full work now, but he's sort of missed this year basically, so he will be very fresh and very excited. So I apologise now for any extra moves that he does, because he's not been anywhere since the beginning of, well, probably about the end of April, beginning of May time. So he's very pleased to be at a party, and I'm sure he'll show you some extra moves that aren't needed. But I think he's a lovely horse. He's great cross country, smart on the flat, and if he had a weakness, it would be a little bit his show jumping. But I think it's a physical weakness rather than that he's a bad jumper. So hopefully he'll come out next year and step up and do more than he did this year anyway.
Okay, so what we thought we would do was, rather than bringing some sort of established advanced horses and coming and trying to break records of how big you can jump and show off, we thought it'd be a little bit more interesting to bring some horses that are sort of more of a work in progress, not necessarily totally established, and just run through not only some exercises, but also hopefully just shed some light on the philosophy behind training the horses, because I know that for most people who come to these things, it's nice to be able to put the kind of things you see into practice with your own horses or with people you teach, and also to get a bit of an insight into how your normal horse develops through the grades, because they're not necessarily born as superstars. And the wonderful thing about event horses is they are sort of jack of all trades. And the common pattern with a lot of the top horses is actually in the training behind them. They don't have to necessarily be bred as complete superstars, but it's just trying to train them up to top level. So we thought we'd just run through some exercises. We got a bit of almost a gym set up in here, with a few different things that we play around with, and then we can just see how the horses cope and develop from there. So, Laura, what do you want to start with?
So I think we're sort of going to break it down into sections, but just to sort of explain roughly what we've got first. Over the backside here, we've just got Trot Polls. So that's where we'll start, because that's a good place to start. It's the Trot Polls. It's working on their eye-foot coordination. The horses need to focus on what's in front of them, whether it's a pole on the ground or a 1.30 metre upright. They've got to focus on the pole and figure out what they need to do with their feet to get their feet out of the way. And it also, not only is it good for their coordination, it works their whole body. If they do it correctly, you'll see, hopefully, that they get a lot of elevation, so it works their body, every part of their body when they do it well. So it's also good if you've got a horse that maybe is a bit short in the trot, because it makes them lengthen. As you can see, first off, Harry's horse has done that really well. You can see the difference between the trot going in, the trot over the poles, and then hopefully by the time you've done it a few times, the trot afterwards, they take that trot that they have over the poles, they take it with them, and you can then increase the stride, the length of stride, and the balance of the horse, and then you can add in this on the little curve and then straight, and you can see it makes it harder for the horse because he's had to come through the turn and then straighten, and if you listen you can hear him. That time he just crunked the pole a little bit. So the aim is that, as you say, a clear round is they don't touch the pole, so it's the same concept with the trot poles. So that way he does it really well because it's just a straight line, and then when Harry came around the corner, obviously he's coming off the right rein, so right bend, then he's changing to do a little left half circle through the poles, and he had to figure it out, and that time the horse was nearly very good, but his footwork between the first pole on the side and then on the turn, because it's not a related distance, so they have to be a bit clever and either shorten, and he did that time, which meant he then had to lengthen over the rest of the poles, and that's why he didn't quite lengthen enough over the last pole coming out. So that time you saw he went for sort of what you say, one less in the middle between the first two poles, and then had to really stretch and use his brain and his body. Ooh.
Now the thing with this kind of thing is, so often the sort of philosophy behind training horses is actually that if you can do the simple things well, then the complicated things become easy. So rather than training over huge fences and complicated exercises, so often you can just pick out the easy things and do this as much with the advanced horses as you do with the 4-year-olds. And it really helps the horses focus their mind. It also, from a rider's point of view, we spend so much time in our sport on our own. And yes, we have team training every now and then. We have our own coaches we work with. We very much, I certainly like to, and I know Laura does as well, we have pupils in the yard, and I try and really encourage a sort of culture of working together and providing feedback to each other. So it's not just me teaching them. I'll be asking what the angle of the crossing and the half pass is like, or the shoulder in, or if a halt is square, and again, sort of things with jumping exercises as well. So when you're on your own, it's actually great if you don't have a second pair of eyes on you. It's great to be able to set out an exercise, because in doing so, that acts as the other person, where it starts to become very clear when the horse is doing it well and badly, and you don't get drawn into just mediocrity. Okay, should we start with the canter poles as well? So we've got 2 sets of canter poles here. Well done. We've got 2 sets of canter poles here. The first set up this far end by C is obviously just 3 poles on the ground, and deliberately set out on a curve just so that the main thing with this exercise, where it differs slightly from the trotting exercise, and the reason why we didn't set it out as a canter version of the trot exercise is because the curve emphasizes the straightness. Now, the straightness is defined by not having a horse necessarily dead straight like a ruler, but the straightness of a horse should be uniform and the same axis of curve as the line that the horse is cantering on. So in other words, if the horse is cantering on a small circle, the horse should be bent to that degree. If they're cantering on a big circle, they should be straighter compared to the smaller circle, but still with a curve through them. And with this, it just really encourages the horse to be dead straight, because if they're not straight, you know about it by the time you get to 3rd pole, because they've either drifted in or out. And the most important thing, I'm just going to chat while Laura does this, the most important thing, way more important than distance, because people always blame their eye when they pick up a bad distance when they're jumping. So if we think now less about the flat work and more just about jumping, when you come to a fence and you arrive on a duff spot, which all of us do from time to time, and it's always important to remember that everybody does it. You're not alone when you do it. And the thing that normally happens is your eye picks up a distance from quite a long way out. And the human eye is very clever at seeing a good distance. But when you get there and you're on a bad shot, and the fence goes wrong. Either the horse chips in or stands off or even stops or gets right under the fence and has it down. The normal reaction for the normal rider is to blame their eye. And they blame their eye and they say they think they saw a good stride, they didn't, their eye must be bad, must be dodgy, and immediately they doubt their confidence, their own ability. And that leads to a lack of confidence. So it's understanding what causes. Laura, if you want, you could just jump through this while we talk.
Yeah.
Or you can jump through this while I talk. If you understand what causes the duff distance, it's normally because when you're on a curve, your eye picks up the optimum line. And we all know it's 4 strides for every horse stride, 4 yards for every horse stride, and then 2 for takeoff and 2 for landing. Now, if you pick up a distance, which is good, but your horse drifts out slightly, it's going to take a longer route to the fence than your eye picks up. Equally, if the horse cuts in across the corner, across the curve, it's going to take a shorter route. So your eye might have picked up a good distance, but the problem was in the inability of the rider to control the straightness. Therefore, they take either a shorter or longer route than the eye picks up, and they meet the fence on a half stride. But the normal reaction is not to blame the straightness, not to blame the ability to have the horse on the line that you wanted. The first thing we do is we blame the ability of our eye. So that's why, from a training point of view, I would always be obsessed about the straightness, and very much the distance is secondary to the straightness, because it's absolutely hopeless having a good distance with no straightness, because that's where you lose it. I'd much rather be on a duff distance and get a good bit of straightness.
So I'm just going to butt in there, because myself and Harry both, I think, probably not on purpose, but we both demonstrated beautifully how when we came on the right rein, our horses drifted out to the left. And so the distance as we came from the first pole, because we didn't stay on the correct line, it meant the last pole, the horses were stretching for it. My horse, if you notice, the second time he stayed on a really nice curve and it just was really level and nice. I noticed that he, compared to the coming on the left rein, he drifted a lot more out through his left shoulder, so I came round with a slight left bend, and even there, even when Harry moved the poles, he still drifted out to the left. So I would suggest he needs a little bit of left bend and get the left shoulder and make the horse actually stay on the curve, because he's just jumping slightly across it. We see there he was much better, but obviously this horse, a bit the same as mine, is maybe a little bit more supple to the left than he is to the right, because I didn't notice him drifting off the line when he was on the other rein. And now he's done it a couple of times. The horse is now staying on a really nice curve and staying through on the exact line that he's on that circle. He's staying, he's not drifting out. So maybe Harry, if you come off the left rein once more so you can compare the two. And this is another reason why something like this is so good, so you can learn something about each horse. Every horse is different, every horse is better one side, one rein to the other, more supple one way to the other. So you can pick up little bits of information about your horse, and then you learn what you need to do in a competition. You know, if you've got a tight right hand, you can see it's so much easier coming round to the left than he is going to the right. He was already looking and thinking round to the left naturally, this horse. And that's the idea, is that nothing really changes. It just stays on the circle, stays on the same stride, stays on the same kind of distance. And the jump sort of is something that just gets in the way rather than it being a big deal, just like that. Like, nothing changed, it just stayed level. The canter stride was the same before and after, before the pole, over the pole, on landing and over the landing pole. So I think now we'll go down and play with this little exercise down the bottom here. So this is something that you can basically mix it up and do in all different ways. It's a little bit so you keep the jumps very small, because it's not about jumping big, it's about the rideability, learning about getting your horse straight and then being able to turn. So I think if Harry will demonstrate to start with. So maybe just pick two on either side and jump, do a big circle and then come round and do the other one, just so that you just keep them straight out of the turn. Then you ride the bend through the circle, then you have to come out of the circle in a straight line. So there we see he's just lost his balance a little bit, probably spooking at the camera and things like that. It's obviously a tight turn there for the horse. But with this exercise, you can do it in different ways. You can pick just 2 jumps, or you can do the 4. Say you jump this one, do a small circle to the left. You jump the other one, do a small circle to the left. Jump the other one, and keep going all the way around like that. Or the aim at the end of it is to be able to actually ride a full circle. And obviously, it's very tight. And again, it's not set on a distance. It's about the horse being clever with its legs. That's why we keep the jumps really nice and small, so that it's not a big deal and they can just learn to figure things out, follow the rider's body and follow their eye. And you can chop and change, so 1 minute you're coming off of the right rein, you're jumping the jump straight, and then you're turning left. So it's all about the rideability and the suppleness of the horse. But always, whatever fence you're jumping, the horse must be straight. You want them to be pushing off. They can only push off equally off 2 hind legs if they're straight. You can, even if you're coming at an angle, you're straight on the angle, so that they have equal push off the floor with their hind legs. And then we see how he obviously came that way. He came off the right rein. He changed his balance over the fence, so the horse did a change, and again, so that time he went left to right. And being able to mix it up means the horse doesn't start second guessing where he's going. He has to listen to where you're asking him to go. So there we see him do a very small circle to then jump the other part. And we see, with it being quite a tight circle, the horse has to really engage his hind leg, which means it's where you want it for a jump. They've got to have their hind legs underneath them to push off the floor. So the more you can use the circle to help you get that push, then it's becoming more natural for the horse. So you can see now, like to start with, the horse was struggling slightly with the tight circle, and now he's doing it in a really balanced way. He's straight over the jump, he rides a really nice balanced circle, then he's dead straight and he pops that.
There's always anyone who goes to the gym will know that feeling that when you've worked hard, the last thing you want to be doing is just endlessly going on and on. There tends to be 2 types of work. There's either endurance work from a fitness point of view, which in order to increase a horse's fitness, there has to be a certain amount of stress through the body. But when you're working on technique like this, you want to work with quality, and there mustn't be fatigue. So it's important to do a bit of work and then give the horse a break and a chance to recover. As soon as they start getting lactic acid in their system, it starts being hard for them, and then they start to lose the quality of the work. So it's a case of doing a few sets like this and then having a little break, giving the horse a breather. And for that reason, I always try and jump in pairs. I'd always try and jump with a pupil or someone else in the yard, so that not only is it a chance to just give the horse a chance to blow while you're teaching, but it's quite hard to maintain that self-discipline when you're working on your own and you've got 10 horses to ride and you think the horse has recovered, and actually they probably haven't. Whereas if you're allowing, like Laura's horses now, the chance to jump while your horse has recovery, then he's normally good to go again after 4 or 5 minutes. And the main thing about doing at this kind of height is they're definitely not fences, they're cavaletti. And there's a temptation, most riders, you start to see sort of common patterns with riders. Most riders tend to, interestingly, not as children, but when they get older, they start to throw their body forward. Almost like we all know what somebody should look like when they jump, and it's something like this. And the reality is that we get up the horse's neck, weight over their front end, and it's much harder for the horse to operate. Well done. Well done. So it's a really good exercise generally to try and keep that upright position. Yes, you've got to be soft with the hand. Yes, you mustn't restrict the freedom of the horse's head and neck because they must have that to jump. But at the same time, we're not looking to be slack with our upper body, but to be quite firm and upright because the horse needs that to jump. And don't worry, you guys are going to be super quick, aren't you? When a horse has, like when my horse just rattled the fence with his hind legs, that was probably because I was fractionally forwards, and as a result the horse never really pushed off properly. He stepped with his front end, but if I'd stayed more rigid and open, and that's where it's quite good to sort of mix up these exercises because it's slightly open to the poles on the ground up there, and then you come to a very collected exercise like this. So rather than working one-dimensionally, it's a great thing to sort of combine two opposing exercises. I better see if I can try and live with Laura's ambition of jumping all in one go.
So you can see here it's really difficult for the horses to actually really listen. For me, my horse, as we said earlier, he's much better on the left rein than he is on the right rein. There we saw Harry just be able to stay on a slightly more inside line and get one stride, whereas when you stay on the outside, which is obviously easier, then you get two strides. But I think it'll be interesting to see if he can do more than two on the one stride because it's very, very tight. Very good. Can you do all four?
I'll try all four.
But yeah, and again, it's about learning the horses because my horse on the left circle, when I was jumping all four on the circle, it was very smooth and very easy. And Harry's horse there, but even there, he didn't get the one stride, but he was very clever with his legs, and there was no difference really in the horse's outlook between jumping from a one stride to then having to be clever to do the two. He stayed soft and he was clever with his footwork, and it meant he then was able to still turn and get one stride afterwards. So I think it's a really good, such a simple exercise that you can make 10 exercises out of. You can learn so much about your horse and then you can work on it. Because obviously if you learn which way your horse is weaker, you then do that a few more times so that they learn to then be as supple to the right as they are to the left and stay on the line, whether it's that they don't bend as easy to the right, or is it more that they actually just fall out to the left when they're on the right rein. So you've got to, you learn different things and then you've got to work out how to fix those weaknesses. And like Harry said, then mixing it up, obviously that's very intense. You can see both these horses have now sweated quite a lot having done that exercise, and they've really had to use their brain and think and use their footwork and really listen to the rider. They haven't got a clue where they're going. 1 minute you're facing one way and then you're asking them to jump something else in the other direction. And as we see there, it was really good. Harry's horse is now just following his eye. Harry looks, and that's really important for the rider to look where you're going, because if you're not looking where you're going, then the horse has absolutely no idea where he's got to go. And now he's just doing that really easily. He's not making an issue out of it. And that, for a big horse, that's a really difficult kind of exercise. And when you watched him, I would say the horse has seriously improved, having gone from this way, when you thought on the right rein he was drifting out and not staying on a line. You would have never thought he would then do that small circle on one stride, 4 jumps on the circle. So I think he's done pretty well.
And you can see how, when I looked at him, and you'd be completely forgiven if you said, why is Harry riding a hunter? To me, he looks like a slightly common middleweight horse that would go all day out hunting. he doesn't look like a top event horse, but when you feel the nimbleness, he's actually got the body and the balance of quite a small athletic horse, and he's got a very quick brain as well. And when we're training for eventing, obviously we're training for all three phases. There is an intellectual side to the training as well, where this is where the different questions vary for the disciplines. With dressage, the level of training is so precise and acute, but you know exactly what the test is. You know months before. And when they get up to Grand Prix, there gets small, fewer and fewer choices between tests. So obviously there's one test which they have to ride through, and they know every time they compete, that's it. So although it's very difficult, you can prepare at home, you go out competing, and in many ways when you get into the arena, it's just a demonstration of your training. And to a certain extent, slightly lesser extent, but to a certain extent it's the same with the show jumping, you know roughly what the test is going to be. Now, you don't know what the course is, and there's going to be varying combinations, but intellectually to the horse, a 12-foot long pole is a 12-foot long pole. You have a few other things, water trays and fillers and so on, but basically there isn't so much of an intellectual test. It's still highly difficult for them to do extreme training, but cross-country, the horse has no idea what they're jumping, and they spend their whole time galloping past, particularly at a higher level, galloping past hazards, Christmas trees, rocks, signs, fences from other classes which are not meant to be jumping. And when they do come to something they're having to jump, they have to assess it on the approach. We take for granted often when we walk a course, we stand in front of it and assess what the problem is. The horse has to assess it from 100 yards out, 50 yards out, 20 yards out. And in that time, the first thing they're trying to do is understand the intellectual question. They cannot, no matter how talented they are, they cannot answer the question unless they've understood what it is. So these kind of exercises of playing around are a good way of just getting the horse quick thinking. You're not looking to catch them out. You're equally not scared to get it wrong, because if we get it wrong here, it doesn't matter, the fence falls down. But you've got to be able to push yourself within reason, beyond what you might feel comfortable with, because then it challenges a horse in the right way to just find their footwork. And ultimately what we want is for them to be independent thinkers, not robotic. We want them to assess the question, and it's our job to come on the right line, in the right canter, and then not interfere.
So I think now just the last little exercise we've got here is 5 bounce cross bowls. Now this is more, it's a very gymnastic type exercise. We haven't got the cross poles too high to start with, so the progression through this exercise is obviously to jump up and down off each rein, making sure the horse stays dead straight. Whether they've got a slight drift one way or the other, they're going to struggle to do that because of the cross poles. And then once they've done it a couple of times, we probably put the cross poles to the top of the wings, so they're very high, so they really have to bascule and use their body, and they have to really make a shape, land, and then push immediately again. So it works them really hard physically and mentally, because it's a lot to look at as they come off the corner. Obviously we've been doing very small, straightforward poles, single poles, and now they come off the corner and there's a lot for them to look at and assess. And that was pretty perfect, really. He was dead straight. He allowed the horse to really use his head and neck, and that's a really important thing with the bounces. You want the horse to use their head and neck, but you don't want them to lengthen. So his stride, over the jump stayed the same the whole way down. And then, you can see and you can hear the amount of effort that horse is having to put in to push equally over each bounce, and he still kept the same jump at the end of the line as he had at the beginning of the line. With a slightly, maybe a slightly younger, more inexperienced horse, or a horse that struggles slightly with that kind of exercise, you'd see them, they wouldn't have the same shape at the end as they have at the beginning, and that's where the repetition helps them, because they can't really get out of doing it properly. They might have it down, but then they've got to come round and learn to figure it out and sort their legs out. Again, absolutely perfect. He stayed straight. The only thing is he landed on the right leg rather than the left leg, but part of that's just being very picky. Obviously he came off the left rein and you'd want him to stay on the left lead the whole way through, but apart from that, jumping wise, I thought he did it very well. And the key thing there is, Harry, if you do it one more time, if you watch Harry's upper body and his lower leg and his hands, you know, his upper body is totally in balance, his hands are soft, his lower leg's supporting, and he's just staying with the horse. He's not throwing his body and unbalancing the horse. Equally, he's not being left behind. So therefore, he is 100% in balance with that horse.
Lovely. And again, it's no coincidence that we're using cross polls here, because it's much easier if you can try and encourage the horse to stay straight rather than you slightly dominating and therefore affecting both in a positive and negative way the horse's jump. Because if we had these as uprights, if a horse had a natural drift from one way to the other, you'd be looking to maintain the straightness, but in doing so would take away some of the liberty of the jump. So there's a very simple reward for the horse here, that if they jump in the middle, they have to try less hard. And if they start to drift, they start to drift back towards the centre of their own accord. So again, just nice, straightforward, self-explanatory exercise.
So we'll just put them to the top of the wings and you'll be able to see the difference of the level of effort that the horses have to put in. Both these horses did it really well. For me, this exercise is great for my horse because he's very scopy and he goes quite high over his fences, but his front legs aren't always a pair. So therefore, with the V poles, he can't really get away with not snapping his front legs up and really coming up to his shoulder. So this is an exercise that I really like for this horse in particular, because it makes him really think. And I don't know, because you're obviously up high and on the side, you might not have been able to see, but when I came off the left rein, he jumped slightly, almost over the first three. It was a little bit of an S-bend, and then it straightened him up. You know, he went to drift right over the first, and then he sort of went, oh, I can't do that, so he almost over-adapted and went to the other side, and then to the other side, and then he was like, oh, actually, I need to go in the middle. So that's, you know, something that really helps him, because I don't have to alter him physically. I just have to stay in balance, and the jump does the altering. So you can almost hear the horse grunting slightly. He's really having to try. And that time, because he was so busy thinking about his front end coming up over over that middle element, he almost forgot to finish his jump off. You know, they've got to be really conscious of their front and back end. So he almost was thinking too much about the front end and didn't finish his jump over that second part. And a little bit the same there. You know, he's landing a tiny bit short over the cross poles because he's wanting to get that front end up. If he just had maybe just a touch more jump in his canter and a bit more push, then it would make the whole exercise a little bit easier for him. Yeah, really good. So that time he came in with a little bit more punch in the canter, and then everything just became a lot easier for the horse.
And you can see the natural technique of this horse. He's like a rubber ball, so as he hits the ground, he's got that wonderfully classical way of jumping, which is the wither pops up, the head goes down, but the back end is very much part of the jump, whereas this horse jumps a little bit in two parts, a bit like a pantomime character where you've got one member of the cast playing one part and another member of the cast playing the other. this horse has got that lovely bounce to the canter. And again, just looking at Laura's technique, the way she stays quiet and upright with a soft open hand, her lower leg in front of her, and you can see the power in that horse's back end. That's where the power came from. Brilliant. Well, we've probably almost done enough with these guys, so if you guys want to ask any questions, Spencer's here, and do ask away, because we're obviously going to have more questions at the end of the session, or the end of the second session, but don't get back in your cars and think, oh, I wish I'd asked X or Y, but I was a bit nervous and didn't want to ask a stupid question, or maybe it had been answered earlier in the day when I wasn't listening. So do ask away, and very, very happy to chat about it.
Just try that flying change once more.
So, there is no real rule. I mean, there's one very good rule here, which is that this was the number of poles they had. but I would try and normally have an odd number, because quite often a progression of this exercise is to use a cross pole on the first one and a cross pole on the last one, and the ones in between to have only one pole. So you get an alternating left wing, right wing, left wing, right wing, which again really accentuates the horse's ability to stay straight, because when they're a bit green, they can definitely start to drift when you've only got one pole in each cross. So that's a good sort of thing to do, and if you're doing that, it's good to have. I quite like to have an odd number, so that if you then turn round and jump it off the other rein, you've not got the same right wing or left wing. It's quite difficult to say that.
It's quite interesting, it's always interesting having two riders, because obviously everyone has a different way of doing things, and personally when I start this exercise, I would start with the cross pole, the first cross pole, and then just poles on the ground at the next ones, and I'd come there, and if they did it nicely, then I'd have the cross pole, poles on the ground, then a cross pole, poles on the ground. Then same thing, cross pole, poles on the ground, cross pole, poles on the ground, cross pole, and build up gradually like that, especially with a young horse who's maybe, a bit looky and a bit backwards. I think it's you don't want to overface them. You're not trying to catch them out. It's about a progression with them, and obviously for me, like this horse, he's an 8-year-old and he's experienced enough to, having done this little bit of warm-up, to then come straight to these 5 cross poles in a row. But if I had a young horse, I wouldn't do that, and if I had a real baby, I might even start that I just have all the poles on the ground to start with, just so that they learn where they're going, and you can even work on keeping them straight just over the poles on the ground. But for me it's a real gradual exercise, and this is the end product. Obviously we haven't got all night, so we didn't want to take all night doing one exercise, but this is the end goal.
And also for the young horses, it's a really good incentive for them to follow they're doing the elementary version of what the older horses are doing. So you might start with 4-year-olds. Once they've got used to just popping over poles on the ground and generally sort of trotting into a little cross pole on its own and jumping it, then as Laura said, you can start with the principle of the exercise, but with either only 2 poles at the beginning and end, or minuscule ones on the way. So they at least start to get the intellectual concept, even though it's not as challenging either from a technique point of view or from a bravery point of view.
And Laura, would you have a baseball coming in, whether you drop your hand and dump the exercise, or would you try and lead that to your eye and the horse's eye?
For me, I'd leave it, because I think this kind of exercise is, as we've said with the other things that we've done today, is about their eye-foot coordination. It's not about the rider being absolutely spot on to the first part. The rider is responsible for the right canter, and the straightness out of the turn. But other than that, as long as the rider is in the right balance, then the rest is the horse's job. And if it makes a mistake, then it makes a mistake. It's the only way the horse is ever going to learn is by making a mistake. The best riders in the world can't be perfect all the time unless they're Mickey Young. But therefore, the horse at some point needs to learn. So the sooner you teach them to think for themselves, then, I don't know, however many people watched Burley, you would have seen that, you know, there were a lot of places on that course where riders weren't perfect, and, you know, horses needed to think for themselves and be clever, and if you've protected them by always having a place pole, so therefore they're always at the right distance when they take off, that doesn't teach them anything, personally.
Okay, anybody else have a question for either Harry or Laura quickly? No? Okay, good.
Oh, there's one over there.
Okay.
Look at that good mover.
Strutting.
So the question is, how would you approach a grid work session with a horse that rushes grids?
Okay, so I'll jump in and then say anything if you've got something to add. With rushing, there's different reasons why horses rush. So quite often the rushing is basically an overload of adrenaline and excitement, and sometimes rushing is a horse's mechanism of dealing with a rider who hooks and pulls and puts them in a consistently bad spot. So it's a little bit trying to identify why they rush. You might have a thoroughbred horse who's just come out of training and it's all they've known is to accelerate and jump in a forward flat way. So normally, once you've understood the concept, then you can start to address it in the most appropriate manner. With something that rushes out of sheer excitement, or horses come out of training, then I tend to do lots of just jumping out of a trot. So I might spend the first 6 months just jumping fences out of a trot, and you might jump a whole course. You might have a course of 11 fences, and you'll have oxers, you'll have fillers, you'll have water trays, you'll have everything in that. They won't be big. They'll be, probably sort of the height of these cross poles at the middle point, and you'll have oxers like that as well, but so that the horse just comes in and they can drop their head and pop. Because when you're in trot, it's very difficult for the rider to use their eye, and the horse starts to learn. They might hit the fence the first time, but they start to learn they're on their own. It's no longer a relationship between them and the rider's hand. It's a relationship between their eyes and the fence. And horses aren't stupid. Normally, once they've been allowed to be consistently soft at the fence, they will start to develop the shape of their jump and slow themselves down. If it's to do with a rider and then being backward and inconsistent, the reason why the horse goes to rush is because, again, they're not stupid. They start to, if they're put in a very difficult position where either it's going to hurt them to jump out of there and they consistently wrap their knees around the fence, or it's just too much effort to constantly have to either stand off or chip in. It's very normal for a horse to come round the corner, lock the jaw, and accelerate in a seemingly mad way, but they're not mad. They're simply taking over because the horse would rather arrive at the fence in a good spot, although they appear to be going far too fast, but they're dominating the rider and taking on the rider so they can at least arrive in a proper jumping place that they can get their front end off the ground. So from that point of view, again, it's just trying to be consistent. The rider learning to do plenty of work to a pole on the ground so their eye gets better. But again, with the horse, rather than trying to take it on and reprimand it by being strong with the hand, that's where I would try and be as soft as I can and allow the horse to slow down through their own technique. And there's one expression I always use, which is the pat. That the pat doesn't reward softness. It's a pat that creates a softness. So that's a way of saying that on the approach to the fence and on the first stride on landing when a horse would shoot off, if you get the rider to pat with their inside hand, it's very difficult to say to somebody, don't do something. And what you're desperate to say is, don't grab hold and do this. But if instead of saying that, you say, do, pat, keeping the rein in the hand, then that's the opposite of grabbing hold. And that normally then creates a softness. And in doing so, the rider then wants to pat the horse. But the reality is, the order is that you pat and then that creates a softness rather than waiting for the horse to be soft and then patting to reward them.